Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting. I'd like to hand over to Dawn to start the meeting, please.
Thank you, Chair. This is just to confirm that at the full council meeting on 21st of May, Councillor Whelan was appointed as chair of this committee and Councillor Black as vice chair.
Thank you. So I'd like to begin by welcoming members and officers and those members of the public watching via YouTube. I'd like to extend a special welcome to new members of the committee, Huntingdonshire District Councillor Lara Devonport-Ray. Welcome. He was recently been appointed as one of the local authority police and fire representatives. Right. And also Henry Batchelor in County Council. County Council allows filming and photography at its public meetings, so please feel free to take pictures and use social media during the meeting. Can I ask, though, that everyone present turns their mobile phones to silent or vibrate whilst the meeting is taking place. At 11 o'clock, there is a 2-minute silence scheduled, but they're also doing the flag raising downstairs, and I propose that we adjourn this meeting just before 11 o'clock so that we can go down for that and then restart as soon as the flag raising is over, if everyone is happy with that. Thank you. Right. So I think the fire alarm is going to ring to announce that here, but if it rings at any other time, there is no test planned, so I will adjourn the meeting. We'll make our way downstairs via the nearest available fire exit, which is through the middle doors on my left. Muster point is in the car park to the rear of the building. Item 2, apologies, declarations of interest. Dawn, do we have any apologies?
Yes, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor Sharp, from Councillor MacDonald. We have Councillor Wood substituting. From Sarah Haywood and Michael Hudson, send apologies too. And we've got Matthew Pink attending virtually via Zoom.
Thank you. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? Adela.
Yeah, I just need to mention that I'm a Ramsey Town Councillor, and Ramsey Town Council is mentioned in Appendix 4.
Thank you. Henry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This is on my register of interest, but just for clarity, so my father's in receipt of a county council pension, but I don't think that precludes me in any way from taking part.
Thank you for that.
Pension member.
Thank you for that. Is that everyone? Thank you.
Sorry, Chair.
Also, I'm an active member, and my wife's also an active member of the scheme.
Thank you for that. Right, so item 3, we're being asked to approve the public minutes of the Pension Fund Committee meeting 28th of March 2024 as an accurate record. Can I ask if any member who does not agree with this proposal to raise their hands now? Okay, I see no objections to the proposal to approve the minutes as an accurate record, so we will take that as carried unanimously. Turning to the action log, do officers have any comments or updates? No, nothing on there. So we're being asked to approve the action log. Members have any questions? No. Are we happy to note the action log? Yeah. Thank you. Item 4, public questions. We've received no petitions or public questions. Item 5, administration performance report. Can I ask Michelle Oakenson, Governance and Regulation Manager, to present the report?
Thank you. So yes, as usual, I'll just pull out the key detail of this report. So the first topic, really just to bring to your attention, is around the area of KPIs, which is obviously an area that we have been discussing, excuse me, for some months now. So as you'll see in the report, for this particular period of February and March, overall things are looking more positive, with just the exception of 2 red and 2 amber KPIs there. As you'll recall, in December, we increased the target from 5 working days to 10 working days in line with industry standards on the retirement benefit from active employment, which has seen a positive impact on that as well. The estimates obviously are at red at the moment, and we have been concentrating efforts on our critical KPIs and continuity of income and making sure that we're physically able to pay our benefits. As time goes on, we obviously hope that the estimate of benefits will follow suit as well. It's probably also worth noting that the main issue at the moment that we've got, and as we've previously discussed, is with the sickness levels being particularly higher than anticipated. We have got some going through formal absence management processes. We also have some training within the teams that we're addressing also. So although we're looking obviously to improve on all those KPIs, there still will be a certain period of instability while we obviously address those issues within the service. So as agreed at the March meeting, we had agreement for four full-time posts and 1 additional part-time post. Some of these roles are progressing. So the pension officer roles, these were roles that were already in place in terms of the job descriptions and having everything set up for those. So they're progressing with adverts being set up and shortlisting applied to those at the moment. With the 2 brand new posts, which was the administration assistant and the training officer, we're currently in the process of getting all the necessary paperwork in place for those, set up obviously through HR and our systems as well. But we are hoping to go out to recruit to those in July if we can. And really just a point about the training officer. This is one key role that we do see helping alleviate some of their pressures within these teams, because as well as the sickness and other issues within the team, quite a lot of training is currently going on to get the team fully up to speed, especially in the operations area. So with the training officer, it'll obviously free up the team leaders within those teams to actually just focus on business as usual rather than the additional training aspects there. So just moving on to KPI outliers. So this was a piece of work that was requested at a previous committee. So we have looked at the period from October to March to see where we were with outliers within that period. And as you'll see, there was 35 outliers for the period ranging from 2 to 43 days. Most were completed within target, outside of target were prior to January. So again, we're kind of seeing a bit of a trend where, we are trying to resolve these issues and things are gradually getting better. But prior to January was where most of those outliers were. And again, the same reasons, the 43-day in particular, when we've looked into that, a combination of the sickness within the service at the time, the additional pressures that we've had following the McLeod judgment and remedy for that. We also had annual leave that was conflicting, obviously pre-agreed, but conflicting with some of the sickness and the ongoing training. So they're the reasons that have kind of contributed to some of those. But as we've said before, we do have plans in place and previously mentioned things like restructuring certain teams. We've done that already. We're trying to get more resource into the team. We're managing our sickness absence. So we do hope to see progress in that area as time goes on. Just a comment on the IDRP in the report, and only because the date the decision was due has now passed. And at the time of writing this report, that was a true statement. Very recently, we've just extended that particular case to the 28th of June. It's a particularly unusual case with some historical arrangements in place. So we're currently obtaining some further information before we can make a determination on that one. So that one will appear in the next report now. Just really a comment on the late payments. Obviously, both of those appendixes are in the confidential section. So Appendix 4 is the standard one that we bring you. Appendix 5 is a completely new appendix that we're bringing you, but with permission from the chair. What we would like to do is if Corey can pick those up in confidential section later in the meeting, just obviously so he can give some further detail around those two cases. But apart from that, I think that's the main detail of the report, but happy to take any questions.
Members' questions? Seems very quiet here today. Adela?
Yes, in Appendix 2, on page 27, which is about informing members who leave the scheme after retirement age of the benefits due. In February, within the 75% outside target, 89% was due to delays from the employer, and then again in March, 60% was due to delays from the employer. Is this the same employers that are delaying this? And if so, what is happening about it?
Thank you. So yes, this is one of the areas. So with the customer journey KPIs, this is where we're linking these directly to statutory targets. So anything that isn't 100% technically becomes a red. And we are kind of paving the way with this in the industry, as in we're the first, we believe, to start looking at these. What it has meant is the actual reporting behind some of these is extremely complicated because of all the various multiple factors that you've got from members, employers, and ourselves. And within that, the backwards and forwards. So for employers, for example, they might give us the original data on time, but it might be incorrect or in the wrong format and it goes back. So the ultimate objective is to have detailed reporting on the employers, who they are, whether it's a systemic issue. And at that point, we will then intervene and tackle that with the employers and obviously provide more guidance and training. So the reporting side of that is currently still in development while we try and work out exactly what we can and can't do in terms of the trigger points that we've got there. So within those targets, we've obviously the 89 and 60%, we've got some data on that already. So it's now at the point where the teams are looking into that data to see how it can be broken down and to start recording that data so that we can see any patterns going forward.
Yeah, the plan initially, having got a few months worth of statistics, is to communicate globally with all employers. So including through the employer forum, which is coming up later in the year. So we will effectively be saying, look, this is the problem we've got, and you know, give a consistent message to all employers. And then once we've done that, we will then be able to go quite firmly to those employers who are still persistently failing. But I think, as you're perhaps aware, the majority of the data we get from employers comes from a small number of providers, because it's the councils, you know, and the other local authorities, obviously. Some of the large multi-academy trusts or lots of educational establishments come through EPM, for example. So we are able to sort of like concentrate on a few, and we'll get most of the funds data in on time.
Sorry, just to give you a picture as well, you were talking about the same employers. It is across the board, but one of the difficulties we have in this is that exactly what Mark was saying, where you've got a separation between the employer and the payroll departments, either it's an outsourced department or a large employer. managers are self-serving with the resignation or the leaving process. So if they don't indicate that there's a retirement, or the member hasn't spoken with the employer to say that they're retiring, they don't always know they need to send us that information in advance. So the process is already starting after the retirement date, and we're trying to catch up and chase up with that. So that's one of the large challenges that we have, is trying to get those dots connected so that everybody is communicating and knowing the position. The website changes that we're making is one of the ways I'm looking to do that. And with these processes that lead to the member needing something, us having to take action, the websites will be drafted in a way that will set out the whole process. So what the member needs to do, what the employer needs to do, and then what we will do once we've got all of that. So it makes it clear to everybody who's reading that. With the website at the moment, the employer information is separate to the member information. So neither side necessarily knows what the other one has to do if they read just their section. So that's one of the ways we're going to hopefully tackle it.
Lara.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for the warm welcome to the committee, and especially to Michelle for answering so many of my questions in advance. My question is about the Appendix 1 and 2 as well. In Appendix 2, we get to see the percent within target. In Appendix 1, we're able to see the quantum of that. So in Appendix 2, if there were, we don't know if there was one case that was missed or 100, we just know the percentage. And I'm wondering if the next time this data comes, where that information is available, whether that could be provided to us. And also there are a few questions I have on the 2 exempt papers, which I will place a marker for later today.
Yes, thank you. As I say, we've kind of been developing this whole area over the course of the year, really. So yes, happy to take those comments on board and see what we can do in terms of adding that additional detail for next time.
I think it's fair to say that these reports have changed dramatically after the last few years. Members, any other questions or discussions? Okay, in which case we're being asked to note the administration performance report. Are we happy to do so? See no dissent, so that is passed. Thank you. Item 6 is the governance and compliance report. Can I ask Michelle to present this report as well?
Yes, thank you. So what I'll do on this report is just pull out the key detail of things that are particularly affecting us at the moment. The dashboard update is probably the biggest thing that we are looking at up at the moment, and the actual update I'm going to split into 2 sections. So the first section will be about the current update and what we are doing as a fund. And then there is a secondary update just to give a brief summary of the National Audit Office findings on the delay. So in terms of dashboards itself, it's now been confirmed that on the 25th of March, DWP have released a ministerial statement providing an update on the publication of connection guidelines, which includes now the staging timeline for connecting to the dashboard. And that's the piece of information that we've been waiting for. So the connection, we have the 2 pieces of information now. So all schemes legally need to be connected to the dashboard by the 31st of October 2026. But as per the staging guidelines, all public service pension schemes connection date is confirmed as the 31st of October 2025. So that's obviously the date that we are now working to. And the intention, we believe, is that the October 25 date up until the October 26 date will be a period of testing to make sure that all of our data is going through the dashboard and through the ecosystem as it should be. Testing with the ISP providers themselves is due to start later this year. And the purpose of the initial ISP testing will be to inform the Secretary of State when the dashboard available point will be available to the public. So depending on obviously how smoothly all that testing runs, and then as schemes start to join, we'll inform that decision further down the road. Pension regulator is being very clear about not having regard to the guidance is a breach of the law. So we will be keeping decision logs and logs of everything that we do to make sure that we can clearly evidence what decisions we've made and the reasons for those decisions. The only reason that I've interpreted that they're not making this secondary element, the connection, the staging connection, statutory, is just to allow for some flexibilities in really certain circumstances, such as if a scheme was going through a change in payroll provider, or if there was an administrator that was responsible for several schemes and actually their staging deadline all was very close together, or indeed the same date. So we don't fit into any of those categories. So we will be aiming for the 31st of October 2025. Based on this information, the project plan has completely been refreshed now, in line with the governance guidance. And we've started off our project meetings, which are held on a monthly basis now, just to make sure that we're progressing at the speed we need to be, to make sure that we're not slipping on any of those deadlines. So that's kind of the national kind of what's been released and where we are with that at the moment. The National Audit Office undertook a investigation on the delays of delivering the pension dashboard programme. So as you'll recall, dashboards has been on our agenda for quite some time now, and the whole project was put on pause originally, with just some general findings of just the technical architecture was what was provided at the time. So obviously further information has been provided on that now, and the findings have at a very high level found that capacity and capability issues, including the lack of digital skills and ineffective governance, has contributed to the delay. Part of that issue was that DWP delegated responsibility for delivering the programme to the Money and Pension Service. But one of the criticisms was that it didn't have the assurance at the outset that they were actually able to deliver on that. And then in December 22, it came to light that it was not achievable, and actually the whole project needed to be paused. The delay has led to a revised connection guideline timeline of obviously 2026, which is 1 year later than when was originally published, and the estimated costs have also increased by 23%. The good news is as we know, in May 24, the project came off reset, and due to real progress being made, including the delivery plan, the reviewing of the digital architecture, and appointing a new senior responsible owner with the necessary experience needed to run that project. And I thought it'd probably be worth just a comment at the end of that section, just to put into scale the size of this project. So in 2022, the Pensions Policy Institute, which is an independent research organisation, estimated that over 2.8 million pension pots worth a total of 26.6 billion were considered lost. So that's obviously the project that they're trying to pull together here, and obviously that we're working to as well. So just another couple of other updates just on things that we're working on at the moment and things to mention. General Code of Practice. So this came into force in March, and we have started to look at the compliance against that code now. As mentioned before, it is a consolidation of previous codes, so we're not expecting significant amounts of actions to come out of this. However, the actual process of confirming that to be the case is obviously quite time intensive, making sure that we're referencing everything that we do and make sure we've got appropriate evidence to do so. So what our plan is at the moment is to look at all the regulatory compliance and bring that to you definitely in October with a high level view of where we are with those. And then depending on how we get on, the pension regulator expectations and best practice, if we get to a point where we can bring that all to you at the same time, we will. If not, those two will feature as a secondary update to you. Skills and knowledge, just a reminder that all the mandatory training is due by the 24th of July, or for newer members, don't worry, within 12 months of appointment. Currently, 3 committee members have completed the whole suite from start to finish. So well done to whoever they are. And if you haven't completed the whole suite, don't worry, I haven't either. We've still got a bit of time, but just to put that back on your radars. And in line with that, I don't know if you recall, but last year with the training strategy, we didn't firm up any long-term decisions on training because we wanted to see how the Lola platform suited everybody for this first year and how everybody found it. Have the opportunity to feed back to the platform providers if we had any comments. So a questionnaire we're hoping to send round in July about that as well, to help inform those decisions and to see if there's any feedback that we need to send back on that. And lastly, on the policy and strategy updates, just wanted to flag that we've obviously done it slightly differently this time because we've got 2 tables, one with policies that we have been able to fully look at for this review period. There's a secondary table on there for ones that we are looking to do, but they have other dependencies, or it's a bigger piece of work based on the officer reviews. But we just wanted to flag that they haven't been forgotten, and obviously there is a plan in place for those as well. But yeah, happy to take any further questions on the report.
Members, over to you. Lara?
Thank you. Michelle, in your report, you mentioned the gender pensions gap and the issue of that across the country. Do we have any way of knowing whether in Northamptonshire and Cambridgeshire we have a particular concern in terms of gender pension gap, or is it just a wider issue?
Yes, thank you. So this, from a pension fund point of view, we're probably going to tie in quite closely with the work that we're doing on EDI as well. So from a pension point of view, work on the gender pay gap and indeed with EDI is going to look at kind of the wider communications and making sure that our communications are as diverse as possible and attracting and are written in the right way, that we obviously reach out to as many people as possible. The difficulty with the gender pay gap is it's more from the Scheme Advisory Board, a national view at the moment. And in terms of, and what happens with that particular piece of work is the pension scheme really is the secondary piece on that, depending on what employer has decided prior to that to obviously come into the pension space. So from a pension point of view, we're trying to, as Corey mentioned earlier with the website, we're redesigning the whole website to make sure that our communications are actually fit for purpose. And instead of it all being very kind of, I don't want to say mundane, but you know what I mean, in terms of everything not jumping out at people, we're trying to make it into real life situations for people. So, you know, are you thinking about going part-time? If you do, have you thought about this? And trying to really make it relevant for people at various stages of their lives to pick up on that. The difficulty we have is we only hold a certain amount of data on our pension system. Because we have to have a legal processing need to hold that data. So we wouldn't have the level of data to know. And indeed, I think it's probably an area that we'd probably get some additional advice in as we go along, especially with the EDI journey, about actually even the data that we have got. So we do have obviously gender data on our system, but what we should be allowed to do with that and how we feed that all in is definitely a journey that we'll start to embark on and see what we can do in that space.
Thank you. Members, any other questions, issues?
In that case, I'll ask another. You list the different policies and the idea of bringing forward a full review of the risk strategy to the end of 2024. Would that include reflecting any new risks or new obligations that we have, that we expect coming out of the TCFS regulations? And I noticed that we have a new training module specifically on that. Thank you.
Yeah, so the plan is with the risk strategy. So we've had a high level review as officers, and actually since the strategy was put in place, it was quite some time ago now. And actually we've also got different governance advisors to what we've had in the last few years as well. So the intention is to fully review the strategy to get it up to date with where we are now. And actually the risk register, as we'll see when we get to that item, has probably evolved a lot quicker than the strategy has been updated. So we really do need to bring all that together and make sure that they are fully aligned as well. So we will review the strategy and the risk register. As you say, we've now got the new module, the training module on TCFD as well. We will look at that in terms of the risk strategy, but what we plan to do is look at that with our governance advisors as well, to see if they've got any views about that and how we can incorporate that if it does need to be incorporated.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, if I may. One of the benefits we have is doing two funds is we get two views sometimes from different governance bodies, but equally external auditors. And we've had a view from the external auditor for the Northamptonshire Fund, which I think in essence is that our risk strategy is quite concise, and there's lots of things we could have in it that could effectively set out more exactly what we do, and that I think we're going to look at it with that lens. Because it's quite a briefing. The other thing that you'll probably see coming down the line is there might be a couple of extra data points we put in our risk register, like how we treat the risk and actually specify how we're treating it, and maybe risk proximity as well. So it's just a few things we're looking at, but we're going to do it in tandem with, as Michelle says, our advisors, and obviously only bring the things that a proper pension risk management consultant actually thinks we should bring forward. Hope it's helpful.
Adela.
Excuse me, it's on page 40, the anti-fraud and corruption policy. I was quite interested to understand how you can verify members of no fixed abode, because presumably they might not necessarily be in this county, they could be anywhere in the country. And I just wondered if you could give a bit more detail on that, please.
No, you're absolutely right. And that's kind of the issue that I'm trying to have a look at the moment. So we did have a particular case. So obviously everything that we do is based on, you know, what we think is right in the first instance. But actually, as members come to us and say, well, hang on a minute, I can't give you an address because of whatever reason, we then have to think differently and think, well, actually, how do we verify these people? Because the policy at the moment says that if we can't verify somebody and somebody's address, we will suspend the pension. But of course, if somebody's got a legitimate reason, we need to have a different process in place, because we don't want to obviously penalise those people, you know, wrongly. So it is something I am looking at. Obviously, in the first instance, a lot of cases in that particular scenario have a particular PO address or box set up, or we put a diversion on or a care of address and all those type of things. But in this particular case, none of those scenarios fitted. So the answer is I don't know at the moment, but it is certainly something that we do need to think, well, actually, if none of those scenarios we've got set out already fits for a particular member, what would we do? And we will bring that to you as part of the policy.
Okay, I see no other issues in the room. So we're being asked to note the governance and compliance report and note the immaterial amendments in sections 3.29 to 3.31. Are we happy to do so? Thank you. Okay, in which case we'll move on to item 7 then, employer admissions and cessations report. Can I ask Corey Blows, Employer Service Manager, to present the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this is our standard report noting employers that have entered and left the fund. There's quite a lot on the report. It's quite a busy report, so I will just take some time to summarise and draw your attention to the key aspects. You'll notice in the list of the 3 admission bodies that are listed, one of them is also listed in the cessations part of the report and has quite a backdated start date on that as well. So I just wanted to take some time to explain that. This particular contractor, neither the Academy Trust for who they were fulfilling the contract or the contractor had informed us of the original transfer of staff. The staff had been deferred as part of our normal processes because we thought they were leavers from the scheme. And it's only when the contract has been retendered that it's been identified that they weren't covered by an admission agreement. The regulations allow admission agreements to be backdated. And with this type of body, if they're willing to sign up to the regulations, we can't actually refuse entry into the fund. So when a backdated application for admission like this comes in place, we do need to process that and put the records back in place for those staff members. We did write to the staff at the time as well to let them know they were deferred and not in the scheme. So they had plenty of opportunity to enforce their rights themselves as well. So they weren't in the dark on this particular situation. So that's why they're reported in there twice, because it was a backdated admission that had been put in place after the contract had actually ended. This has happened a couple of times with some contractors, not normally this far away from the start date. And it is sometimes the fact that the contract's coming to an end that focuses the minds and gets things in place. We also are aware it's a national issue. Other funds are dealing with this, and it was brought up at one of the officer groups recently. So there is a debate going on about how we might try to resolve these kind of things down the road. What we do locally in these situations is that if it goes a month after the contract date, we do write to the staff to let them know what's happening, so that, like as I say, they can enforce their rights if they need to. But it is a national problem that funds are trying to resolve at the moment. You'll notice the list of cessations. There's 10 bodies on there. That looks quite large, but 4 of those are actually the same body that had multiple contracts, and we have to have a separate admission agreement for each contract. And the others, it's just the end of the natural contract, apart from 2 employers on there who actually chose to close the scheme. One of them was a managed exit that we know about. They were consolidating their company. It's a housing association, and they were looking to harmonise their paying conditions across the piece as well, which meant them leaving the LGPS because the majority of their workforce were not in the LGPS. I'm not sure of the precise reasons why the other employer listed on there chose to close the scheme. I would also like to draw your attention to the 3 previous cases where we had an exit credit determination to make. This is where there is a surplus identified at the end of their participation. All 3 bodies in this case have had a payout. You can see that the figures there, though they're fairly immaterial to the fund, they are quite large amounts for those employers. In these cases, all 3 bodies were older community admission bodies, meaning that nobody else really stood behind the liabilities, and their contributions were the only contributions coming into the fund. One of the employers who's got slightly less payment, they inherited some assets from a previous housing association, so we took into account how much of the surplus actually came from them, which is why they've got slightly less than the full surplus. Happy to take any questions on all of that.
Members, questions on admissions and cessations? Chris.
Thank you, Chair. I think at almost every meeting I ask questions because I'm never fully confident that I understand all of the intricacies which are involved in the cessations in particular. I have finally understood after 2 explanations I believe I've had about the reasons for the funding surplus not necessarily matching the exit credit. I finally do understand the principles behind that, although I wouldn't be able to do it myself if I was required to, but at least I understand the principles behind it, which is important. Maybe a rather more fundamental question here. If a scheme decides to, a particular employer decides to exit our pension scheme, and they make the decision to do that, they choose to do it, would I be correct in thinking the following? That assuming that the scheme still has either deferred or actual members, that the value of the scheme would be transferred to some other fund other than the LGPS. Is that how it works?
That depends on the member's choice themselves. So the default would be that they have a deferred benefit within our scheme. And as part of the assessment, when we're looking at the value of the liabilities that are being left behind and therefore what the funding position is, we take a view on that depending on what the ongoing situation is. So is there another employer guaranteeing those liabilities? So do the liabilities refer back to a local authority, for example, who was standing behind the contract? We would take a certain view in terms of valuing that there. If it's these type of employers where nobody else is standing behind it, then we take a more prudent view because we recognise that we can't get any more money from them in the future. So we do build that into the calculations to accept that we still have the risk of those liabilities. But to answer the further question, the members can choose to move their pension to another pension scheme if they wanted to, if they've got an ongoing provision somewhere else.
Okay, I think that answers my question. Thank you very much indeed.
Lara.
Again, Corey, thank you for answering so many of my questions already. But so today we have three examples you've given us on previous cessations. One of the three is where the exit credit payable is less than the actual funding surplus. As a new member, is that unusual? Is that something that happens a quarter of the time, 50% of the time? What's your sense of how common that is?
It really is a mixed bag. So the process with an exit credit determination, the regulations set out that we have to determine how much of the surplus is payable. That could be zero. And there's a multifactorial approach that we have to take in making that decision. Lots of different factors like risk sharing between the employers. What do the contracts say? But one of the important aspects listed in the regulations is the amount of the surplus that comes from the contributions of that actual employer. And in the case law around this as well, the judge said that he found it startling that an employer could get all of their contributions back, let alone more, particularly if the surplus had come from inherited assets. By inherited assets, I mean assets that transferred from a previous employer, and then you've obviously got investment returns still coming on those. So an employer might have received £1 million worth of assets, and you find actually that the growth in the surplus comes from that £1 million, not the £500,000 or £2 million that they might have paid in directly themselves, because obviously their contributions is paying for the growth of pensions as well. So you have to take into lots of different factors like that into account. One of the big things that seems to be affecting this is timing. So whether an employer came in while we had negative market conditions in the world, so therefore liabilities were valued quite high and they got a high level of assets to match those. If they came in better times and the liabilities were lower and they had a lower starting level of assets, then their contributions tended to contribute more to the scheme. What we're finding is we've put in place a really robust process of this. There's a mixed bag across the scheme of how funds are dealing with this. We took extensive legal advice, extensive actuarial advice, and we do have a nuanced approach that comes out of this. I've determined that full surpluses need to go out. I've determined none and somewhere in between. We know some funds are saying all or nothing in some cases. So we're quite confident on that basis that we're going through a very robust process with this.
Okay, members, no other issues, questions? In which case, we're being asked to note the admissions of the following admission bodies to the Cambridgeshire Pension Fund and approve the sealing of the admissions agreement. Aspen Services Limited, Taylor Shaw Limited, Kids Are Us Out of School Club Limited. We're being asked to note the cessation of the following bodies from the Cambridgeshire Pension Fund: Wimbledon Parish Council, Clarion Housing Association, GPC Skills Limited, VHS Cleaning Services, which has 4 organisations, OCS Food Company, Avocet Cleaning Services, Taylor Shaw Limited, and to note the update on the previously reported cessations relating to Sanctuary, Kimbolton and Cross Keys Home. Are we happy to do so? Yes, thank you very much. In which case we will move on to item 8, which is the Pension Fund. The Pension Fund Annual Business Plan Update Report 24-25. Can I ask Mark Whitby, Head of Pensions, to introduce this report, please?
Of course, thank you, Chair. I think in previous years, we haven't actually brought an update report this early in the year because when we start drafting it, it is still April, so very, very early. And for that reason, in terms of the financials, we're not looking at any forecast variance for the current financial year. We will start doing that in the following quarter's report. The previous year, we will obviously give the final update in the annual report and accounts, which comes to the July annual meeting. And then that variance will drop off of future reporting. So not much to say on the financials. I will just pick up on a handful of the activities, including the 3 ambers. So the first amber, the procurement of address and mortality screening, so linked into trying to find members, which Michelle was touched upon earlier. That is progressing well in terms of the extension. We've just got one final sign off from a statutory officer before we can put the extension in place formally. The issue there has been the waiver process has been quite complicated because of the value. It's very low value each year, but the first year of the original contract, we did a whole of the fund search, which put a really high value on that first year of the contract. So that's why it's had to go through quite an extensive waiver process. We will then obviously reprocure in terms of the deadline specified in that activity. So by sort of like the turn of the financial year next year. The procurement of an integrated service provider, so an ISP, just as a reminder, is the supplier that enables us to connect to the pension dashboard ecosystem. When we procured our software for the pensions admin system, I made you aware that the intention was to have that within the contract. Because there was a reset on the pension dashboard program, actually we couldn't actually finalize that when we originally finalized that software contract, and so hence there's a need for a variation. We've been going through the process with the provider. It's quite complicated. I had to go through an extensive legal review, but we also had to undertake a data privacy impact assessment at the same time because we were using the data for a different purpose from what we do at present. That review and that assessment, it was all completed, and then the software provider, because this is a very fast developing area, wanted to change those terms, those standard terms, and so we're having to just do a further legal review on the revised terms, hence why that's remaining at amber. But I don't have any reservations about the fact that we will conclude that in fairly short order now. I did just want to touch on the next one on the list. So I'm looking at actually, sorry, section 3, which is the RAG status of all the activities, the investment consultant contract. And just to remind you, at your request, we are going to be looking at whether you wish to extend or reprocure after the IC objectives review, which is at July meeting. So the investment consultant objectives review is where we look at the performance of the investment consultant. We did it last year. If you recall, there was a self-assessment, there was assessment by officers, there was comments by our independent consultant. And what we'd like to do this year is send around a short survey. The intention is, and I'm interested in your views, was to send that to the investment subcommittee members for you to just do a very quick self-assessment in terms of whether you're satisfied against each of the objectives, and then send that back to us. We will collate that information and anonymously give you the what that feedback is as well, so we can incorporate your views in advance of that meeting. I'll obviously invite comments on that, so if you give that a bit of thought, and once I finish my run through of these 5 activities, and interested in your views on that. The next one I wanted to just touch on was the undecided leavers, which is another amber. This one, again, I believe I've been quite transparent. I intended to keep at amber throughout this year. The reason is because of the number of conflicting projects we have, which impacts our ability to deliver this. And also, if you recall, we're putting an extra 2 bodies into business as usual to stop any spillover from BAU. And they're the 2 roles which Michelle was saying we're actually, I think, the advert is out and we've got the applications in, and we're assessing those applicants at the moment. So the activity reported a tick up in terms of numbers, but actually the following month we went below the lowest point we'd been. So we are below 7,200. So we kind of knocked off all of that increase. But I think that just illustrates quite how volatile this can actually be, hence the need to keep it at amber. And then finally, the other activity I just wanted to touch on was the one around the climate action plan. At the last ISC, there were quite a few decisions made in terms of what we're going to concentrate on going forward. When we published this, this was actually in advance of that meeting, and therefore we will update that climate action plan fully to reflect the decisions made at the ISC. And so that's why there's some gaps, and we'll completely refresh it with those decisions around extra metrics and extra reporting against different asset classes. That was all I had to comment on. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Chris.
Thank you, Chair. A couple of questions I've got now on the investment consultant contract. My first question was, I noted that the current contract is due to finish on the 30th of September,
yeah,
but we're not due to make a decision about extending it or reprocuring until October. So I was a bit surprised. I remember that it was going to be after the July meeting, but I'm a bit surprised now to see that the decision is going to be made after the contract is actually finished. I know that mention is made of there may be a slight delay for reprocurement. If we were to go down that route, I just wonder how long that would take. I am aware of how some procurement contracts within the county council take a significant amount of time to go from beginning to end. And would we be starting from a standing start, or would we already be prepared to hit the button on the assumption that we may wish to reprocure? So that was my first question.
Yes, so even in last year's business plan, I had said that there would be a need for a temporary extension if we went through. So I effectively gave the committee a choice of whether to delay the decision until after the IC objectives review, and the committee agreed that the appropriate action was to have the review and then to reprocure. And what I said was it would be about an extension to probably the 31st of March. And I'd already spoken to Mercer and they were happy with that. So that has already been kind of, I've already confirmed that within the committee previously. So that would be the process. There's a national framework for it, obviously. We're obviously aware of the suppliers on that. We've got documents we've used previously, but I think at the July meeting, one of the key things will be what representation you want from, I'm assuming, from the admin authority itself, maybe Michael or another representative of his team would want to be on that selection panel. The question would be whether any representation from the members wants to be on that as well. So that will be within the July report and a decision to be made.
Thank you, Chair. Just as a follow-up to that, has that potential timetable for reprocurement going up to the 31st of March, has that been assessed to be in accordance with our procurement requirements in CCC? Assuming it is CCC, we've got it is the CCC procurement process which we have to go through.
Well, I mean, the way procurement works is certainly there would be certain requirements from CCC in terms of legal review of the contracts, for example, and probably because of the value of the contract, the ceiling. But the procurement team is not necessarily always the CCC procurement team that supports. It can be the WNC procurement team. It depends which one has the resources. So at the moment, I mean, obviously I can have some early discussion, but until I definitively know where we're going to procure, we don't actually know whether we need that resource at that time. But I mean, to be fair, I think this is a fairly straightforward procurement that we've done a number of times. And again, what we're assessing is the service need, as it were, as opposed to can the providers technically do it. We already know they can perform the contract because they've been put on the platform.
And again, another follow-up on that, if I may. Are you satisfied that by making the decision whether to reprocure or continue after the termination of the contract, that we are not in any way prejudging the issue or under any pressure to make a decision in one particular direction?
I think well normally there would be an advanced decision in before a extension point as to whether you're going to extend or not. So I think what we're doing is fairly normal. A few months in advance of the extension point, we're making a decision whether to take up the extension. If that's what you're asking, sorry. So we're going. So the IC objectives review will be in the July meeting, and at that meeting, I would want a decision as to whether to extend. Okay.
Right, and that's where I've got the issue. I may have misunderstood something.
Okay.
Under key milestones, it says the decision as to whether to extend or re-procure the investment consultancy contract will be at October 2024. That's on. I've got a page up, paragraph 4.8.
I do apologise. That's not the intention. Sorry, I think over the last few months we've kind of refined it. It is going to be at the July meeting, we will give you feedback on the effectively what the various parties think of it. You will give your feedback. So that will be in the report, and you can make a decision at the meeting. I do apologise if I confused matters.
That's much appreciated. I withdraw my last three questions because it turns out that they were based on a false premise. Good. My second question, if I may, Chair, is on the little questionnaire which is going to the ISC. I'd be really interested to know what sort of questions are going to be asked, and if you believe that the members of the ISC will have the necessary knowledge and understanding to be able to answer them.
So it's simply going to set out what each objective is, which I think they're fairly plain English objectives. So this is the objectives of the investment consultant. So things around, their ability to communicate, around ESG, around the ability to deliver overall advice to meet the overall objective of the fund. And we'll simply be asking, are you very satisfied, etc. And then you can put any comments. So it's going to be fair. So I think certainly I would hope that the ISC members would be able to answer that. I think my only reservation around the wider pensions committee is how often they see the investment consultancy to give a view, because they tend to see the investment consultant annually. So that's the reason why I was proposing ISC members.
Thank you for that. Can I suggest that we now take an adjournment to go down for the flag raising? I have got Howard and Lara both got questions to raise, so I have made a note of that. So if we can temporarily take an adjournment for the commemoration downstairs. Thank you. If we can be back sort of straight afterwards, hopefully about 10 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Howard, you had a question.
Yes, thank you. So I'm referring to paragraph 4.31, which is regarding the processing of undecided leaver records. My question is two-part. Firstly, what is the age profile of the backdated cases? So how far do they go back? And secondly, what's the criteria for going to red on the RAG rating in terms of our progress plan?
Yes, so I think going to red would be if I felt we wouldn't be able to meet the overall objective, which is to not complete it by year 3. If we've got uncertainty, but we can still recover, then I think it would remain at amber. So that's probably that. The age profile. So we obviously prioritize. So to be clear, we have a project team which is dealing with the cases which are more than 6 months old. The business as usual team deals with current cases and some spillover. And the spillover up until now has sometimes been because there hasn't been the right resource to complete all of the BAU cases. But there have been months when that's not the reason. So there have been months when, for example, we've looked at every single case that's come in. And the reason for spillover is because we've had to go back with queries on particular cases with the scheme employer. So there are months when even without the extra resource, we've been on top of the numbers as an administrative authority, and the issue has been the data quality. What that means is the project team has been able to deal with the aged cases, and you've got new backlog spilling over. And so in the project team, they're effectively prioritizing them for a number of different priorities. It can be the quick wins. Sometimes it can be the ones where there is other activity going on in the service where it just needs to be processed as quickly as possible. It can clearly be because of the age of the member. So we know that any member who's 55 plus can retire. So there's been a concentration on that. Even though most people will perhaps retire a bit later than that, it's a possibility. So that's the way we've kind of prioritized it, with multiple priorities within that team. I don't have sort of like statistics of how many of what year, for example, but I mean, it would be available. But I hope that gives you a feel for how we're prioritizing.
I'm really trying to understand what is the oldest case outstanding.
I don't know what
that's
the absolute,
my question.
Yeah, sorry, I don't know what the absolute oldest case is.
Okay.
But what I would say is that we recognise that there have been some really aged cases in there, and we have sometimes because we can't go back to the employer after a certain period, may have to make assumptions as an admin authority sometimes to get through it. But I can identify that case for you.
Lara?
I can see from your report and through the business plans the fund's journey towards reducing the climate carbon footprint. But I know that Cambridgeshire County Council, I'm not sure about Northamptonshire County Council, is also very committed to community wealth building. I'm not sure I can see from the report how that idea is being considered, both in terms of procurement, which Councillor Bowden has already mentioned, and in terms of investment. So are we investing in procuring in a way that builds the wealth of the people in our geographic area, or in fact, of the members of the fund?
I mean, we would look at it probably in terms of place-based investments, leveling up investments. You can put obviously a number of badges on it. In terms of the Cambridgeshire Fund, actually, there's a number of sort of investments that we have put in place over time. We have effectively a regional private equity fund that invests in companies that employ within the region. I mean, it can go out of region as well. So it obviously had to meet the needs of the fund in terms of where it could invest to make sure it could still deliver a return commensurate with the rest of the UK private equity. But it does have investments, for example, a number in Peterborough, for example, where it's employing people. So we look at, in terms of metrics, the number of people employed within those companies, and sort of more targeted metrics for each of those investments. We have a investment in the Cambridge Building Society, and that was effectively to enable them to accelerate their lending to families within the region in terms of mortgage lending. That was some debt we provided some money towards, so they could, rather than just use the natural growth, they could get many thousands of extra families mortgages. And we also have an investment in the Cambridge and Counties Bank, which has some sort of regional focus, but perhaps less so than the other two investments. So that's what we have at the moment. We have been in discussions around more place-based investments through Michael Hudson and the Combined Authority, and there's other things going on within which are available. So one thing that in terms of the name, it's an embargo, but we have mentioned in ISC social and affordable housing. That is something where I think we have to tread very carefully for obvious reasons. But now we know who the manager is, we would be able to enable them to present if there was interest at a ISC level.
Is this a topic that the committee could hear more about at a future meeting? The general area around how the fund is trying to meet the community wealth building objectives of our organizations and our employers?
I think that would fall within our general ESG remit, and there's no reason at all why that can't be discussed as part of that. Okay. Members, any other questions? Adela?
Yeah, sorry, it goes back to the backlogs, 4.32. I just wondered why the target for this year is 1,000, and yet for the following 2 years it's 2,500. What's the reasoning? Why isn't this year 2,500?
Because I knew we wouldn't have the resources in place to deal with the BAU, because we only got approval in the April. And so there would be the start of the year where we wouldn't, bear in mind we needed to keep on top of BAU, we wouldn't be keeping on top of BAU. My expectation though also was that we'd be doing considerable work on the McLeod project in terms of the rectification of or remediation around records. That hasn't quite panned out as yet because the central advice hasn't come out again in at the pace I expected. So we've been doing some work on it, but not the amount I expected. But those two things were the two main drivers for that.
Members, if there are no more questions, then we're being asked to note the business plan update. Are we happy to do so? Thank you. Right, on to item 9, which is Cambridgeshire Pension Fund Administration Strategy. Corey, can I ask you to present this?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we're seeking approval today for changes to the administration strategy for consultation with employers following a review and a major redrafting of the policy. As appendices, you can see that we've got the current strategy there and the new strategy. I purposely haven't provided a cross-reference of the changes between the two because it's been completely rewritten. So all you would see was red lines and changes on there if I did that. So the document is there for you to read in full and provide any comments or thoughts on that. Before I take you through the paper, there is a small typo on the report as well that says that we will be taking it to the board for review and comment. That has already happened. The board have already put their input into this and we've taken that into account when redrafting the strategy. The admin strategy is a key document for the fund. It sets out the framework for administering the fund, as well as setting out the main duties of both the administrative authority and the employers in the fund, alongside the performance standards that are expected of each. The regulations give administrative authorities the discretion to prepare and publish an administration strategy, but once we do so, the provisions contained within that strategy are binding on both the administrative authority and the employers, which is why we go out for consultation with the employers as well. If agreed, the strategy will be launched for consultation at our employer forum next month, and then the employers will be given a month to give their comments and responses to that consultation. The document, as I said, has been completely restructured. There's some new sections added to the document as well. I'm not going to go through all of the changes, but I will cover some of the big changes in the document. And I would say as well that as part of preparing this new version of the strategy, we did take advice from Aon, who were our governance and benefits advisors at the time of conducting the review as well. So their thoughts have also been fed into this. As you'll see, we've added a section covering digital administration. This is reflecting our digital by default approach. There's quite extensive information on there regarding the iConnect provisions, which is how employers send us information on a monthly basis. It sets out the deadlines and the expectations for that as well. Later on in the document, one of the KPIs that we've changed is the deadline for submitting that report on a monthly basis. So currently, employers have until the 10th working day after the end of the month to send us that information. The problem that we have with that is depending on how bank holidays and weekends fall, even if the employer did everything that they needed to by the dates they needed to, we could miss our statutory obligations for writing to new members. So when we've looked at that and worked it through in the year, we've worked out that if we move to 7 working days after the end of the month, we should be able to meet our statutory obligations at all times, as long as the employer does what they need to do. So that's the reason for the change in that. The logic being as well that most employers would close their payroll before payday, so they should still have sufficient time to gather that information and send it across to us by the 7th working day. We've also changed the way that we've set out our performance standards in the documents. You'll see in the appendices, we've split this into the member experience KPIs, like what Michelle was talking about earlier on, which references the statutory obligation and then what we expect from employers in terms of that entire experience. And then we split the KPIs down to what's expected of the employer and what's expected of us as the administrative authority as well. So that sets out nice and clearly the total expectation and what part each party plays in that. Of course, there are the complications around processes where the member has input into this, which is hard to take account of in the deadlines as well. So we have tried to account for that the best we can. Another addition to the strategy as well is inclusion of the escalation process that will be used in various different situations. So that's nice and clear and transparent for all employers. Everybody knows what is expected and when. The reason for the different escalation processes is there's different requirements and expectations for different types of activity. So we've got one escalation process for the submission of iConnect and the monthly data, one where officers are working on particular cases and need answers very quickly to process that case, and another escalation process where we send bulk queries to employers, as we recognise it's more efficient and better to manage that in a group process, and that might take a bit longer for those employers to do that. So we would agree a deadline in those situations and hold them to account on that. Finally, the other addition, which came as a suggestion from the board, was to include a glossary in there of key terms as well. So I've included that as the last appendix in the pack. I'm happy to take any questions on the strategy and the report.
Chris.
It's always interesting rereading this when some of the wording causes you to question some of the things which have been said before. And one of the items looking through this are the targets that we've got. And plenty of them are at 100%, but quite a few at 95% or 90%. And I think target is actually the wrong word to use, because we're not aiming on those ones which say 95% and 90% to do that. Surely these are minimum expected standards rather than targets. And I just wonder in future if we could have a word other than target for something which is just meant to be the minimum we expect to be able to achieve. And on one of those, I was just, again, going through these in detail, and I hadn't spotted this before. The one which I found surprising was the notification of an employer of any issues relating to its poor performance. And the period for that is within 20 working days, which, give or take, is basically a month, of the performance issue becoming apparent. Now, I think that within a month of the performance issue becoming apparent is a very generous time period anyway, and yet we only have the target of 90%. That just seems to me to be strange, given that one imagines that doesn't happen every day of the week. I'd have thought it was quite a rare occurrence for it to happen, and given that it's I've thought rare and quite specific, I wouldn't have thought it would take 20 working days to start to notify the employer that there are such issues, let alone only having a minimum expectation of doing that 90% of the time.
Yeah, just to cover that off directly, the reason for the 20 working days is one, to account for the various workloads that we have within that team that we're trying to manage. So the day-to-day administration of employers coming in and out, as well as the queries, but also the complicated nature of some of these failures. So on the surface of it, it can look like the employer has failed to notify us. But as I was talking about in the retirement process earlier on, actually that failure might be because the employer didn't know that they had an action to take. Sometimes it might be because they've provided data, we've issued queries. We need to look at, was the query that we sent to the employer clear? Was it clear when they needed to respond? Things like that. So there is an element of investigation that needs to go on before we can confidently approach that employer to say that they've definitively done something wrong. Particularly as this leads to us recharging employers for additional costs, I like to be really thorough and make sure that I've got all of the information and confident in our position before we start issuing those kind of charges. Obviously, we want to keep a working relationship with the employers as well. So it's a careful liaison process, and that's why I've given the extra time to deal with those.
Members, other questions on this? I think I'm inclined to agree that talking about something such as minimum service level or something similar to that would be useful rather than target. Okay, there's no other questions or points, and we're being asked to approve the changes to the administration's strategy for consultation with employers. We're happy to do so. Thank you. Move on to item 10 then, which is the Cambridgeshire Pension Fund Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Approach. Can I ask Michelle to present the report, please?
Thank you. So this was previously mentioned in the business plan, and this is the first report that we're bringing to you that directly concentrates on EDI and the approach as a starting point for the fund. So I just wanted to kind of set the tone with how this has all come about and the thinking behind it, and where we can go as a committee with it. So the report and the plan is based on the pension regulator guidance, which was published in late 23. Primarily the guidance that was published was looking at the governing body and why EDI principles are important from the fund from that aspect. There was some mention of some wider engagement. So we've obviously included things like communications, but there was also some other areas, and we worked in conjunction with our governance advisors, Aon, at the time to widen that out a bit further still and included investments in that space as well. So the action plan covers the key actions that link to the guidance, and also just a bit, we've pushed it a little bit extra where we can do in some of those areas as well. So again, wider than the regulator guidance, excuse me, we recognise that equity is a really important concept where we need to recognise that everyone has different needs and circumstances, and sometimes treating everybody equally doesn't actually provide the best outcome for everybody. And an example of this, just to share, to put this into context, is providing size 6 shoes to a class. Technically, you would say that you've treated that whole class equally by providing that same size shoe to everybody. But actually, in reality, the only people in that class that would benefit from that were people that were size 6. Anybody smaller or larger than size 6 would actually suffer as a result of that. So what we need to do is consider if there are any reasonable adjustments that we can make to individuals to succeed. For example, where there is a barrier for anybody sitting on the board or the committee, you know, whether it be linked to equipment or whether it's the format of the papers. But really important that, I mean, I do say the word consider. Obviously, we might not be able to accommodate every single need that everybody has, but it's really important that we do consider anybody that does want to apply and does have a barrier to do so. When we've looked at the developing the policy, we want to particularly ensure that this aspect is covered. We've also consulted with the Cambridgeshire County Council team as well. And we will also be completing the equality impact assessment when we come to look at the policy as well, just to make sure that that's all ticked off as well. So in addition to the adequate representation on the committee and board, member engagement, as if this kind of linked into the pay gap comment earlier, want to make sure it's as diverse as possible, making sure that we're regularly reviewing in line with our EDI principles when we've agreed them. We don't hold most of the information on a lot of the protected characteristics, but we will obviously look wider than that just to make sure that our all our communications are fit for purpose and have everybody in mind. And as we already know, in terms with a piece of work we've done previously on the ABC review, where we're currently in the process of putting a Sharia compliant fund in place as well, like tying all of these elements up. As mentioned earlier as well, we will be taking, obviously this isn't particularly our area of expertise, and obviously bringing this into the world of pensions following industry standards as well. So where we do need to take appropriate advice, whether it be from the CCC specialist team or our governance advisors, we will do that as well. Another action or one of the actions on there is about the effectiveness reviews of the committee and the boards. So this is due, but I've pushed that back slightly now just to make sure that we do incorporate some EDI questions, hopefully off the back of the approval of this plan. So the plan itself, obviously in the appendix, really is based as a starting point based on the pension regulator guidance. Happy to obviously develop the plan as we go through, or if anybody has any comments at today's meeting. And then following the approval of the plan, I think it's really important that the first thing that we do is get the training set up as soon as possible. So hopefully aiming to get the first set of training set up for July in that. So the report itself is asking for the approval of the plan, which outlines the approach that we want to start looking into and take. And secondly, just if you agree with the pension fund board comments that were made, if you're happy for us to make those amendments as well, but happy to take any questions.
Members, over to you. Any questions on this item? Henry.
Thank you, Chair. So I think Michelle mentioned this in the introduction, but presumably this will be just the starting point. It'll be a constantly evolving document. So, you know, we can have it back at the committee every, you know, at regular intervals. So we can make comments on it because, you know, obviously things change as time goes by. So, yeah, if we can just have confirmation that, you know, we will be able to sort of edit this as we, you know, as we move through the year. Thank you.
Yes, absolutely. And that is absolutely the intention with this. You know, this is a brand new area coming to the committee that we're obviously going to evolve over time. So happy as we go along with this to take comments and suggestions and update the plan as appropriate.
Liz?
Yeah, just to comment that I think it's a very welcome approach and welcome definition of equity and EDI in the paper. And just a question about the, I think Michelle touched on it, the amount of data that we have on our members around any protected characteristics, because I guess some of them may have joined or, you know, before it was common to collect that data. And just, I guess, a comment around the member communications, which I think is absolutely crucial for understanding, you know, for our members' understanding of, you know, their pension rights. So welcome the kind of clarity that you're going to put into the website, hopefully, because and I guess even in there's a couple of examples in the paper of how daunting it could be for kind of ordinary members to understand the language that we use, you know, and perhaps we could try and, you know, de-jargonize the language, if that's the word, to make it more translatable to our members. Because I think if I had to try and explain some of the sentences, even, you know, in this paper, it would be a bit baffling for ordinary members. Thanks.
I think having the glossary attached to the previous item actually goes a long way to helping along with things like that, but absolutely. And we should all think when we start to use any kind of acronym or any kind of sort of shortcut into meaning something, that we actually at least explain that in the first place. Lara.
As this is my first meeting, I could admit I have 2 pages of acronyms written down that I had to look up. But on this particular topic, I'm interested in how it interacts with people who have English as an additional language, that's not their first language, and members or potential members and how they interact with the scheme. But then also how we reflect people who have English as a first language, and we know nationally the average reading age is age 8, and how we connect with the public in the UK.
Yes, thank you. That is a valid point. And I think part of this action plan is obviously kind of setting out kind of the skeleton of obviously the direction of travel. I think the important thing with this is we've already had one discussion with our governance advisors in this space and already spoke about kind of various areas that we need to look at and how we need to broaden that and make sure that we are covering different aspects. So we certainly will pick that up as part of that discussion and bring that back to you at a later date.
Corey, did you want to come in first?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, just to come in particular on the communication points and stuff to do with the website. Very much the reading age that you referenced is something that we've been conscious of for a number of years now in our member communications. My communications officer who deals with this recently took a plain English diploma. She got one of the highest scores they've ever had on that course as well. So she's quite an expert on that area now, and she's starting to embed that within the communication strategy that we have and the branding guidelines and things like that. So we are taking account of that. Obviously, it's a constant learning process. We're always learning what people do and don't understand, but we do try our best to declutter the language as much as possible. I think what you will find is there will often be more complicated language that we might use in these reports. We would definitely not use that with members directly. So just to reassure you on that. On the point about English as a second language, we do have services available to us to translate any documents that are asked to be translated. We do that on a demand basis because of the cost involved in doing that and how little take up there usually is. But we do advertise that is an option on all of our member facing communications that go out, particularly our newsletters and our annual benefit statements, things like that. People are encouraged to contact us if they need to. That includes Braille and other things like that as well, that people can have larger text, all sorts of different arrangements we can make. So hopefully that gives you all reassurance on those points.
Any other? Okay. So what we're being asked is to approve the proposed EDI actions located in Appendix 1 and approve the changes set out in 3.2 following the Pension Fund Board feedback. Are we happy to do so? And you can be assured that this is something, as I think Michelle will testify to, that is quite important to me as well, seeing, and it's important that we see all of our actions here trying to reflect everybody and not just ourselves. Thank you. Right, item 11 is the committee agenda plan. Officers, do you have any comments or updates? No, I'm just trying to find the item. Members, do you have any questions on the agenda plan? Okay, we're just asked to note the agenda plan, so I assume we're happy to do so. Okay. Chris.
Sorry, I can't resist it. What did occur to me when I looked at it, and again, this has been common practice for us, is just why the access updates are always treated as being exempt items. Now, I understand the legal argument which is being used under Section 12 of the relevant schedule of the Local Government Act about it being information relating to the financial or business affairs of any person or organisation, including potentially the authority holding that information. I understand that. But why just for my own sake of wanting transparency, what is it within those reports which causes us to need to have that as an exempt item rather than being available to not merely the public as a whole, but to scheme members in particular?
I mean, put simply, at most access joint committee meetings, so they give a digest of what's going on at the access meeting. So a determination is made on each of those papers at the joint committee as to whether it's in public session or private. And there are usually a few papers at the beginning which are in public and the rest are in private. So that's obviously the statutory officer of the would be the Kent County Council has made that determination. And since we are reporting that and that information, we have to basically follow that same judgment. So we have no right to put it into the public domain. So therefore, we could do it in two parts and effectively have a public part, but that would primarily be things around the business plan update, for example. That kind of thing. I guess the nitty-gritty of things like the developments in non-listed, the operator procurement, all those sorts of things would have to remain confidential.
I don't disagree with you on this, but it's something I think that will need to be looked at. Okay. So in order to discuss the following items, we need to move the meeting into private session. The committee is asked to resolve that the press and public be excluded from the meeting on the grounds that the following 3 items contain exempt information under paragraph 3 of part 1 of Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972 as amended, and that it would not be in the public interest for this information to be disclosed. Information relating to the financial or business affairs of any particular person, including the authority holding that information. Are we happy to do so? Thank you. As this is the final item on the agenda, I would like to express my thanks to those members of the public and press who have taken the time to watch the meeting today via the Council's website. Its broadcast will now end. The committee is due to